Hello
Hello.
Hey.
and welcome, Jamie. So tell us a bit about yourself and lead us into the week in Supreme Court cooing and so forth.
All right. So I am Jamie Crofts. I still occasionally pop in at Wonkette from time to time. In my other life, I'm the policy director for a nonprofit called Wisconsin Voices. Before that, I was a civil rights lawyer at the ACLU for a while. And so, yeah, constitutional law and the Supreme Court and stuff is unfortunately my background. Um, but yay sometimes in the past. But actually, despite all of the terribleness that this week was at the hearings, I am really excited about our next Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is just incredible, impressive, brilliant, and has a lot of racist, sexist bullshit being thrown at her right now.
Yeah. Can you tell us? So, what were your thoughts? And you, Robyn, please, again about the what we just saw, the sort of charade and the shit show.
I mean, honestly, I was impressed with the amount that they were able to try and bring crazy ass QAnon shit into everything. It was just you could have played a drinking game for every time they were like, she secretly loves child pornography. It was actually, I found that to be impressive, frankly.
If I add on to that point a bit, because you had said that about the QAnon and the child porn, it also speaks, we talked about this last week, you and I, Robyn, about how you'd written about at-will employment and about and folks sort of got in on themselves about, no, it's so hard to racially discriminate, as if the real world doesn't happen. But this is, to me, a classic example of it.
It is extremely easy to racially discriminate, actually, and to be sexist.
He's calling out one area of her record where he's confirmed people, white guys and other, with the same, and there's no sense of sorry, you lose all your points and go away and don't be senator anymore, because that's clearly discriminatory. You're holding her, if this is a deal breaker, it was a deal breaker for these other guys. Mother Jones had an article about Sam Alito, was very, and Amy Coney Barrett and others have been quite generous to often the right types of sexual offenders. And it's complete BS, but I think it does speak to, in a way, it's a microcosm, because she's applying for a job in a way, right? And we've all, people of color, women of color, even more so, understands where you've been oh, right, you're bringing this up. I know my white counterparts, this has happened to them. They've still been promoted. I did not meet this metric for this year, so I can't be promoted. But what? And good luck ever proving that. It's supposed to be somehow you can magically go to an employment lawyer and get billions of dollars. It's no, it's a quite insidious, but the lawyer's shaking their head. But I would love to hear your head.
Not to mention how many of these people going on about child pornography were buddy with Josh Duggar. How many times have they brought that up? The Trump's labor secretary who gave Jeffrey Epstein his sweet deal. But, those things aren't a problem for these people.
No, those are totally fine because they're white hats.
Yes.
That's all they have to say is oh, well, it doesn't count because they're a white hat.
Yes. Well, they want to give something out of context, that she's a pedophile, as you were saying, it's a QAnon buzzword. Donald Trump Jr. gave a video looking like the Criminal Minds unsub outside his van. Well, look, I know if I'm sorry not to be stereotypical, but if I'm training my children into which van to get into,
it's not the Trump van.
Don't get in anybody's van. Definitely don't get in slightly coke-addled, baseball hat turned backward guy. But he's going on about,
even if he has the best candy.
Yeah, no matter what type of candy he's offering, this is not a stranger. So it's just it is so it was just so absurd that they're trying, but it's like trying to make, you know, the sense of grooming, and their messaging is always on point because that's a part of a larger sense of Democrats are pedophiles,
Yeah.
and they're the ones who are doing this whole thing of grooming your children and by acknowledging that gay people exist, and
Yeah.
that's all the sort of link
Unlike
to
the like giant parade of pastors who like were charged with child molestation this week alone or had to leave Hillsong or whatever. Like, parade of them. I think there were like 2 separate dudes from Hillsong getting charges against them for something. Like they're constantly getting actually arrested for these things. But sorry, I'm like trying to read the little bottom note thing. They're constantly getting arrested for these things or being charged with these things, and it doesn't count because, you know, what we really have to worry about are teachers who will tell kids that gay people exist in order to like entice them into I don't know what. I don't even know what that trajectory would be.
well, and they're just, it goes back to what I would call the bad old days of my own youth, where gay relationships are inherently sexualized, but they hate that.
Yeah.
They want it to be inherently sexualized. They don't want it to just be a family, which is how a child views mom and dad, and mom and mom. They just, oh, these are parents and
Yeah.
kid, and that's a family unit, and that's not hard to explain. It's not like you have to get out the Kama Sutra and explain how things happen. Tucker Carlson seems to think that's the case. Well, no one's explaining that because it'd be like gross. I don't want to hear that. If you spend any time on actual children, they aren't that interested in that yet at that age. You are a weird person if you're talking about it. So the other thing, so there was this whole, this has happened before, I think, and me bashing Democrats on this point, but whenever we would see, and we're going to see this in November, when voting, Black people are in 24-hour long lines to vote, you'll see people being, that's democracy. Black people are so brave. And it's like, well, no, we would rather not be brave, and you actually protect our voting rights.
Murder the phrase brave forever. Like, I just, no.
Similar to describing, Judge Jackson as brave and so steely, showing moments. They've been tweeting moments of her clearly being abused, but like holding it in and being like so brave. And I'm like, to me, that's very sick, because it's not, well, she didn't have to do this. And again, if I'm an average voter, it's like Lindsey Graham got angry and pissed for Kavanaugh, the perception that he was being unfairly treated, and he's still holding a grudge. And a lot of very serious and important moderate Democrats have toasted us. It's like, well, that's not, we don't do that. We aren't that way. And that doesn't help picking a fight and whatever. Well, look, if they're just going after her for her record, fine. But to me,
no, they were literally going after her for, don't you think it was bad that they were mean to Judge Kavanaugh?
And that's all Dianne Feinstein. So that is boggling to me. Dianne Feinstein hugged Lindsey Graham, hugged him at the at Barrett's drive-through confirmation when she got a Supreme Court lifetime appointment and a free Happy Meal. And they hugged, and she was talking about how great it is. I thought you guys made this up. So it's just like, if we're applying for a job and Jamie shows up and I'm like awful to her, and you're like, Jamie's like afterward, gee, Robyn, what the hell was that about? And it's like, oh, well, Stephen's a little upset with me about something, but we're still the besties. It's like, what the hell? Why did you walk me into this? And why did you say, look, dude, this is between you and me. Don't take this out on this random person. Like yelling at her about stuff about like, oh, well, there was a dark money campaign against the judge. I thought, as President Graham, I thought she'd be picked instead of Biden. And I'm what do you think of that? She's like, I don't, what the hell? Like, it's not my concern. It's like, well, and we brought up all this stuff. And then like the gross stuff about her religion, which again, it's like, don't anyone have gavels? Or there's like an old, my mother and I were watching a Law and Order. It's often ridiculous. And like the guy, the defense attorney is just ridiculously type stuff on the the lady on the stand, the rape victim, was out of like just going after her is ridiculous. Her mother's like, is McCoy in the bathroom or something? Is he like gonna have to come out, be like, object, object? Like, I thought I could take a quick break on this. It's like, do a gavel, something. What is he doing? They let him go over his time to ask these ridiculous questions about how religious she is.
Ugh. And this is after like Democrats really refused to get into the fact that Amy Coney Barrett is in a fucking cult that believes that women
that would be rude.
that women are subservient to their husbands, which I'm sorry, we should get to ask questions about when you're going to be on the fucking Supreme Court. Do you consult your husband about your decisions since you are required by your cult to be subservient to him? But no, we've got to scream at we had to scream at Judge Jackson for everything that has nothing to do with her. The anti-racist baby book. I'm still not over it.
God. Which is, you know, like #1 on Amazon now.
Good.
Everyone bought the anti-racist baby book.
But it's like, yeah, like clearly we have to scream at the Black woman because someone else wrote a book called Anti-Racist Baby.
And then wasn't she asked again about, well, cancel culture? Do you think cancel culture is out of control and academics are? Well, do you understand you were just talking? I know you guys are full of crap and don't actually have any real beliefs. But try to like
just like few things that they're like, this is what we say. We're mad at pedophiles, we're mad at critical race theory, and we're mad at cancel culture. We're just going to harp on those things, regardless of whether or not they make any sense in this context.
Ted Cruz is going to be really upset when he learns about what's happening at his kid's school. Just kidding. Husband, he's a husband and he doesn't have to have any responsibility.
He's completely he'll just blame his wife for it. And
his kid does not care for him. His daughter does not care for him. So
I love the videos of her like not letting him hug her and stuff.
Like
I mean, did you see her TikTok videos? She's very, very like, you know who I don't agree with is my dad. Also, I'm bisexual.
No one likes Ted Cruz. And eventually that is part of like growing up, like she will reject her father. And then the other was about, which is interesting. So Ted Cruz then is like became a big thing to for your Fox News talking point to ask her to define what a woman is. Like it's just like a philosophy course. And this is not a philosophy exam. Like legally, and I presume Judge Barrett would have done the same thing if asked. It's like my personal opinion about what gender is actually irrelevant. We're actually going to be talking about most likely what would come up to me, legal definitions. Actually, there is no
by other people.
And originalists, the Constitution actually does not define womanhood versus based on some sort of grade school sexual anatomy.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson had, because women are defined by the ability to give birth per Jesus. So, that, and it's just, it's a lifetime gig. I think they validate parking. There's a lot to say about the Supreme Court. But it's just this absurd thing that anyone, and I would say this about anyone has to get up and abused and slapped around. And then even the nice stuff from the Democrats about, oh, you knit and you're a good family person is nice, I guess. It's still like torture, right? Like the good cop comes in and just buy some coffee or whatever. And then the bad cop comes in and waterboards you or something. It's still, I don't get, it's obviously for an audience of what, 4 people?
Yeah.
Like the must-haves were Cinema and Manchin, who would want this ritualistic torture, and then maybe to make it look good, because there's no difference fundamentally between 51 and 52, a couple Republicans. So Collins, and there's a possibility that Cassidy might.
I feel like Murkowski is the best bet.
Yes, but I'd read something that Cassidy is running
more so than Collins,
and he might possibly And so when it said, well, Collins voted for it doesn't matter. None of that matters. It'll just come up with some reason to excuse.
Collins voted for anything not horrible in I don't know how long. So like,
Yes, Collins will basically hold it against. She'll basically come out and say she can't support Jackson because she's too soft on the people like Brett Kavanaugh. Because during Brett Kavanaugh's case, it was all like some sort of, all Republicans were like ACLU lawyer. I love ACLU lawyers, but they were just like,
Yeah.
well, we don't, let's benefit of the doubt and whatever. And they were always arguing two different things at the same time, right? During the Kavanaugh hearings, it was like, this is the worst. How dare anyone suggest that he assaulted someone? But if he did, I mean, it's just some teenage hijinks. It's like, okay, well, what is it? Should he be really mad that we suggested this? Or it's just more of like a waste of time because it's like, who doesn't do this? So
Yeah.
Who among us hasn't attempted rape?
But
I mean, everyone needs a hobby.
Yes, he was allowed to get angry and but I mean, I wrote about this. To me, it's just sociopathic where people are trying to explain, oh, well, the reason Graham asked these questions is because he was real mad about Kavanaugh. It's like, well, Kavanaugh's been on the Supreme Court.
No. Here's what I think it is. Last time, he made this whole, he did his whole big grandstanding back during Merrick Garland, and then had to figure out a way to justify his vote for what's her face, Barrett, and was like, well, I normally wouldn't, but this is punishment for Brett Kavanaugh and what he went through. So therefore, I'm voting for her, which we all know is bullshit. And so now he's trying to bring Brett Kavanaugh back again into this to again be able to say, well, I might have voted for her, but Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and the same with Childs. Brett Kavanaugh is that it's this cross they won't hang. But again, I think it's effective. The idea of even giving him a hard time. They won't let go of Bork, Judge Bork, who was involved in the Saturday Night Massacre. It's probably a hard no. It's not an unreasonable thing, but they won't let go of that. Like conservatives who are really alive.
I actually have one. I apologize if I said this last time I was on. I don't think we were talking SCOTUS though as much. But I would really just personally like to apologize to Harriet Miers. I know that no one gave a flying fuck about my opinion when that happened, but you would have been a far better justice than Samuel Alito, and I'm sorry.
Well, Myers was interesting because that is an example. He's all up, Graham was all upset about apparently leftists said that you can't have the nice, moderate Southern Black lady who's, I think, is a little bit older than Jackson. All these reasons that would be a perfect moderate choice. You went with this person. And what actually happened with Myers, I mean, she was barely qualified. Who cares about that, really? She was targeted by a lot of conservative groups who were like, no, we want this. We want another Thomas. We want another Scalia. So, and to a degree that makes sense. Why not? You've got you're steering the vehicle. Only chumps really try to keep this whole less moderate because literally life is at stake. These choices, the Supreme Court is a power unto itself, as we've seen. So we could transition to this whole stuff of Ginni Thomas and Clarence Thomas and how the Supreme there's literally it's a scandal, but what can you do? The Supreme Court is completely uncontrollable or unaccountable for anyone. So,
and it's crazy that we just accept that as facts that can never be changed. And no, I don't necessarily think that Congress could enact binding ethics rules because of separation of powers issues. But no, if there is enough public pressure put on the court, they would be required to internally adopt real ethics rules, which they don't have. But instead, everyone's just oh, no, it's the Supreme Court. They can do whatever we want. And by this time next week, most people will have forgotten about it, especially just your regular voters. They might get upset about it for a little while. Media forgets. And then it's just one of the things that comes up every once in a while.
I just love the gall of Amy Coney Barrett appearing at the Mitch McConnell Institute for Mitch McConnell Studies in Advanced Mitch McConnellness, stating, how dare anyone call us partisan hacks? What? Lady, and that's, as my mother would often say, that's what they think of you. That. That's what we can do.
I will tell you, We need to do more of that, because that is where that is what they think of you thing is like works so well for the right, because everything is that is what they think of you, no matter what it is. It's like,
it just
can you pass the salt? That is what they think of you.
Democrats need to hire PR people who are better at being mean.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and not lean on Lincoln part later. Be like, oh, maybe the Lincoln Project will release something mean. It's like, what? How? Why don't we actually fight our own battles? I mean, someone has written that problem is that Democratic consultants, the consultant class, is essentially people like Joe Manchin, who, and that's the only voice they're hearing. And they just think that that's what people want to see. They want to see the black lady get smacked around, and they want to go through that process and be polite. And how she's not allowed to get angry, but Kavanaugh is. And Clarence Thomas is. Clarence Thomas is allowed to basically claim that being called accountable for accusations of sexual harassment was a high-tech lynching. And making it specifically about his race when it obviously wasn't. It was the fact that a black woman, had accused him of sexual harassment. And so, I mean, getting angrier would be helpful after sort of this, and with Thomas. But I mean, essentially, people will be like, they just blow it off, because what can you do? I mean, the Thomas things are so absurd. I saw David French, the writer and conservative writer, talking, hailing Clarence Thomas as wonderful jurist. And so, of course, the Ginni Thomas stuff looks scary, but they keep all that separate, and it's, well, that doesn't make any sense to me, like, fundamentally.
Do they though?
Well, they literally refer to each other as my best friend.
Yeah, and and Jamie, you should speak to this. My sense is that often lawyers do the whole thing of what a reasonable person believes, and if a lawyer friend of mine used to call it the Dixie Carter principle. That was the most reasonable person. So what was Dixie Carter believe?
Who in real life was actually super conservative and had like a whole thing built into her designing women contract that every single time she went on like a big liberal rant, she got to sing on the show.
You've broken so many.
Can I just tell you how it actually upsets me how relatable I find that, because like, yeah, I mean, if I had to like give, that is exactly what I would do were I to have to give speeches I disagreed with on designing women. I would have been really, I look like a designing woman today.
I don't recall if Julia Sugarbaker sang in the episode about the Clarence Thomas hearings, because
that was a really good episode.
She was obviously very upset about what had happened.
But she'd sing in a later episode. Like, it wasn't like,
one to give the speech.
Justice, and then green sleeves.
But back, the reasonable person, because the idea is that, I mean, and many of the Minion defamation suit cases are rooted on the idea that, and same with some Fox News, like, well, no reasonable person believes all this, so you can't. It's not really, you can't get damages. Whatever Sidney Powell said about Dominion, whatever Tucker Carlson says, no one reasonably believes all of this stuff. But obviously, Clarence Thomas thinks his wife is a reasonable person, I would think, right? Like, that's a reasonable expectation, that he thinks she's not a nut job.
What one would think.
He doesn't keep her in an attic. Like, he's not Mrs. Rochester. It's like, I can't get out of this. I needed a dowry.
And also, like, I just think a lot about, like, what if the genders were reversed and it was a woman whose husband had been doing all that? Like, there would be people in the streets with fucking pitchforks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was a liberal.
It has to be a liberal. I think conservatives just ignore the law because they understand that basically Democrats, it's dealing with bullies. Democrats are never going to throw the punch. They're terrified to throw the punch. And everyone's, oh, you're being mean to Democrats. Like, look, I hire, if if someone's breaking into your house, and stealing your stereo, and I'm just sitting there saying like, okay, well, they can't do that. That's illegal. And I can show the legal principles and the institutional of stealing stereos is a bad thing and shouldn't do that. And they walk out and you're like, can you at least like tackle the guy? Well, no, because then that's uncivil. I don't want to do that. I'm useless. Like, we understand that stealing stereos is bad, but like, I'm supposed to be helping.
I mean, that
stop.
works if you're Mr. Miyagi and like you actually then go and kick their ass when they attack you. But like,
well, I mean, Democrats
if you don't, then it doesn't that's not really a strategy.
Democrats said explicitly, I remember them. It was Schumer, not just some random, it wasn't a random Liz Warren. It was Schumer and others saying, okay, guys, if you put Barrett on the court, if you insult RBG's memory and put her on the court, well, people are actually at this time voting to remove Trump from office because voting had already started. Where the gloves are off. And it was not. It was meaningless. It was a meaningless statement because now when we said the gloves are off, we're now saying, "Hey, you want to build some bridges with us?"
Yeah.
So,
no, I mean maybe what they meant by the gloves are off was Biden's going to nominate a black lady, because that's really, I mean, the most offensive thing to Republicans about all of this, I think. So.
And I mean, they obviously are happy with. There are tons of. I think they would nominate black conservative, the guy from St. Louis, they would nominate certain people who are conservative, who fit their standards of being conservative. They love Clarence Thomas for that reason. They like to be able to smear that into its face. So, I just felt there was no sense of, well, what do we do with, obviously Clarence Thomas is a hack. Clarence Thomas is unaccountable, and his wife is fundamentally part of, and Joe Scarborough had talked about this on Morning Joe, and he was a Republican, and in that world, she's not a hack. She's not Lauren Boebert, or because that was always when you were writing about QAnon, and whenever we write about QAnon, it's like, oh, it's just these embarrassing stuff, the embarrassing wacky cousins, and no. Ginni Thomas was part of the elite of Washington, D.C. conservative circles. Yeah. That's how far she's the one saying Hell Hydra. Like, she's pretty high up there. And I think what happens is not, my impression is that when Democrats are faced with the reality of how far the rot goes in the party, how racist it is, how corrupt it is, they kind of veer back, and it's like magical thinking, because then it's like, oh, well, maybe we are at war, maybe democracy is over. That can't be true. It's much more comforting to believe that it's just Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Matt Gaetz, the embarrassing ones, because wasn't that a big thing during after the election, right? Like, so everyone was saying Trump's just playing. He knows he lost. And, those Republicans are just trying to humor him.
He does not.
He lost. And that wasn't happening. He was actively trying to overturn the election. And
the Supreme Court Justice's wife.
And I've been criticized for the statement. I've had it for a long time, which is that Democrats, their responsibility should have been in the House to impeach him as soon as he didn't concede. A sitting president refusing to concede an election. There's no legitimate principle. It wasn't like Bush v. Gore, and there's actually a legitimate legal.
If they didn't do anything, then the nation would heal, and they kept being like, our priority is healing the nation. But like, that doesn't happen when people literally don't want to do that. Like,
yeah, I mean, well, it's a.
They want to show up at Congress with their guns and shit and overthrow everything and have their Second Amendment boogaloo or whatever. Like, that's what they actually want to do.
I mean, blocking transition is not about, like, people making it about, like, no, Joe Biden's seen the White House. He doesn't need to meet, Melania's stupid ass. It's more, there are processes in place for national security. It was the middle of a pandemic. They're trying to do the vaccine. Lives are jeopardized. Like, the transition, blocking the transition was an impeachable offense. Trying to overturn an election, all these BS terms, which then led to like there was no outcome other than, but everyone involved in that knew. And what's strange to me is that everyone believes that Trump is just a symptom. So when this happens and everyone's like, okay, well, that's all over. It's like, okay, well, you understand that unless these, like, you know, the big players, like from Meadows, even Ginni Thomas, are put in jail, unless that happens, this is, you know, 2020 is what happens every election. No Republican is going to concede an election. There will be BS claims of fraud, and it will be a complete national security threat. You see when Biden was like, and it frustrated me, was jokingly saying like, I'd love for Trump to run again. I'm like, well, you barely beat him during during a pandemic. Like, without the pandemic, you would not have beaten him. It would have been 2004 again. And if he runs again and loses, people will die, because that happened the last time.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually think that's a good thing to say, sort of, in the, you know, as long as he doesn't actually believe it. You know, I think it's good to do the, you know, blowhardy type talk, because that apparently does appeal to people. Like more so than, I hope he doesn't run because he'll probably kick my ass. But yeah, I just hope he doesn't actually believe it.
He shouldn't run because he should be in jail.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that was, I think Liz Warren said, is like, I don't, you know, I would hope to not have to run against him as well. I like to think I'm going to be running against Pence, she said at one point, because he should be in jail.
Yeah. Well, and like, so before the 2016 election even happened, I said repeatedly, like I said, was one of the things that really scared me about a Trump presidency was if he won and was in office and lost his next election, I didn't believe that he would leave office. And all the like FedSoc types I went to law school with were like, you're insane. The institution will protect everyone. And like, we had a fucking attempted coup.
Isn't that just crazy?
I'm honestly surprised that it didn't go further, if you want the truth. I am truly, genuinely surprised that it didn't go further and he didn't show up there with like a machine gun and shit and start just like murdering people and going full like...
There were a lot of near misses as to why that there were no counter protesters. He didn't declare martial law. Because again, our Democrats, how far would they have gone? What happens? What happens if some of those, if Kemp had folded? If some of these people had folded, not to make heroes out of Republicans, but at the same time, if they had gone with the flow, it certainly would have been in their best interest, what would Democrats have been prepared to do? Because sometimes if people know, I mean, we're seeing this in the world stage, if they know that you're not going to take a violent action or an aggressive action, rather, not promoting violence, they'll just roll all over you. And you're right, like everyone had this, you're right, Jamie, because everyone had this very West Wing idea about institutions and whatever, and it's also ahistorical. So I try to write about this frequently, like the Compromise 6, where the in the South, you know, there was Wade Hampton Boulevard, is an area in South Carolina where I drive. The governor there had the help of literally the Red Hats, who were white supremacists, who essentially basically did through voter intimidation, overturned, you know, hopefully helped overturn an election, ensuring white conservative rule in the South of Carolina. And that happened. I mean, that was cases where areas that were predominantly Black or half Black of voters were oppressed, their votes thrown out, or they were chased away. And you got Jim Crow. Like, if you're not studying that history, if you study that history, you'll be able to fundamentally see, oh, of course it could happen. Of course this would be what we would see now, but they instead would just do this stuff of, and they never say no. They always, I'm sorry, with a lot of these snotty white guys, they never say I'm wrong. It's not like, God forbid. You know, instead it's like the guy, Brian's, they're like, it's so ridiculous to say we might be in the Handmaid's Tale. Blah, blah, blah. Women are so hysterical. And it's like, okay, well, you got fugitive uterus laws in certain states now. Yeah. Everyone is just like, so many men would lecture, white men especially, would lecture women about, no, Republicans are never going to outlaw abortion because they need that as their fundraising tool.
Oh yeah, that's always been one of my big favorites.
Yep, and the Supreme Court overturning Roe is another thing that like I've been screeching about for years, and everyone called me crazy and said that it would never happen, and now we're a few months away from it happening.
Republicans don't want Roe to go away because they need it to run on. No, they fucking don't, because they will just make up more shit.
Yeah, they're very creative.
No, they got critical race theory, and they don't even know what it is. Like,
we'll make
it doesn't matter.
They will deliver that to. And that actually leads to something else, because there's a lot of what I call Democratic partisans online, and their biggest thing is like, well, the reason that anyone civically should be voting, because look, what can you do? You should be voting because Republicans going to make your lives miserable, and Democrats can stop it. It's like, well, they're in power now, and we're about to lose Roe. And,
yeah.
What about, well, 2016 is why you're losing Roe? And it's like, okay, well, that happened. So if you're saying that there's nothing that we can do, not even after winning 2 straight elections, the F up of 2016 means there's still nothing. You're still going to keep talking about that and blaming, Stein voters. Fine, if you want to do that. But if you're telling voters that no matter how often you win, this is what it is, and we can't protect you, sorry, human beings are going to respond. I mean, voters aren't Vulcans.
Yeah.
People tend to think that they're just going to be Vulcans and vote for. But even if you're just voting on, okay, we can't get health care, we can't, improve the climate, and the world is going to be kind of at least can we hold on to the rights we have, like to right the vote, or to bodily autonomy.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that no, we cannot hold on to those rights. It's not going to happen.
I'm here in Wisconsin where once Roe's overturned, abortion will automatically be a felony. That law's been on the books since before the Civil War here, and we never repealed it. So again, great jobs, Democrats, when in the past you held both houses of the legislature and the governor's mansion and didn't get rid of those here in Wisconsin, because there were plenty of times over the last 100+ years to do that. So thanks,
guys. But going back to I really want your thoughts about Ginni Thomas and that connection, and just in general sense of, just from a legal ethics standpoint, this idea of separation. How is it BS, or is it BS? Like, what are your thoughts here? Like, just as a fairly as you can, say.
It's insane that Thomas would not recuse himself. I'm sorry, I don't believe for a second that he didn't know that his wife was texting with Mark Meadows on January 6th. I don't believe, or at least that he didn't know that she was texting with people in the White House. I don't believe he didn't know anything about that. And like, so also, and this is something I mentioned to you on Twitter, Stephen, is that with lower courts, if you read, kind of dig into opinions about, when judges have to recuse, or even in certain cases when like a specific law firm or prosecutor will have to recuse, it's not just about there being an actual conflict, where in this case there absolutely is an actual conflict, but even setting that aside, public perception of a conflict is one of the most important things to consider. Because when you have things that look like conflicts of interest that are happening all the time, people lose confidence in their court system. And it's really important for everyone that we have confidence in our court system. And in the fact that the Supreme Court just kind of ignores all of that because there's only 9 of us. Well, okay, then increase the court Congress. It's just insane, because it's like, I get it that it's smaller. So like, okay, if, of the 9 of them, all of them went to Harvard or Yale. So if there's a Harvard-Yale case, they can't all recuse themselves. Actually, they could move up appellate court judges to decide specific cases where Supreme Court justices have to recuse themselves. But really, I mean, the fact that like we just kind of ignore that it's a really important part of the legal jurisprudence for a reason, that public perception of a conflict is so important and has to be considered.
And do you think that, well, some of it would be because they are both equally terrible, we shouldn't be that surprised, by his rulings. His rulings are consistently terrible. And so perhaps the conflict of interest would look more overt if it was sort of a Marley Madeline, James Carville thing, and his wife was, say, a liberal activist, and on a specific issue, he was suddenly voting with the liberals. It would look like, well, that seems inconsistent. Do you think there's anything to that argument where it would look more if she was of different political background, or does it still look bad just because she's?
I mean, it might be more obvious or seem more obvious in a situation like that, where it's like, wait a second, where did this come out of nowhere? Oh, look, your wife funded that case.
Yeah.
Also, another thing that a lot of people seem to be forgetting is that Ginni Thomas has been involved in a ridiculous number of things that have gone up to the Supreme Court over the years, and he's never recused himself.
Yeah.
No, and the argument that she has a right to be a conservative activist, just because her husband's on the Supreme Court. It's like, oh, boo-hoo, your husband's on the Supreme Court. I think you're covered. Like, my wife's on the Supreme Court. I mean, if my wife's on the Supreme Court, I'd be like, I don't need to write about politics. I'll just, get in the needlepoint or something.
Honestly, if it weren't like litigation that she's involved in too, like that wouldn't necessarily, or like things that directly go up to the court. Like, there are ways to be an activist that aren't related to like cases and specific issues going up to the Supreme Court. Like, if you aren't participating in an attempted coup, like, your husband's never going to have to worry about.
Yeah.
But I mean, that ruling, I do think, was an obvious one. Although Clarence Thomas is weird and does like to be the sole dissenter in a lot of 8-1 cases, so like that part's not that weird.
One thing I will say is that I can absolutely picture Clarence Thomas as a person never actually listening to his wife. Like, I could. That does not escape me as a possibility, but at the same time, appearances.
Well, based on he is terrible in every way, but they do appear to be quite the conservative power couple. I mean, the Times article about how they met. I mean, they met her, so it's not even like they met at like a Star Wars convention and they have that in common, and they just happen that they don't really talk about politics, but what they really like to do is go, all these hobbies or whatever. They kind of, their interests have all kind of aligned and been rooted in politics to the point where
it's just, he does strike me as a like, they might have that in common, but also women are stupid. Like, it seems like would be his.
Well, I mean, certainly she is given that on their first date, she went to a cult deprogramming or something. She does not give a very good argument for, you should read the Times article if you have not. It's insane. They're at the point of like how they like to get out of DC, where everyone hates them because, Black people and the elite. And they like to go to these rural areas where there's all the night the flags flying. Which flags, Thomas? And everyone treats them they don't even know them, but they treat them so well. It's like, well, I've been to parts, I've even grown up in some of the parts of area you're talking about, and I think the great treatment you're receiving with you and your white wife might be because they do effing recognize you as Clarence Thomas.
Yeah.
The idea that him and his black, hi, where are the white women at? And everyone's very nice to him. Oh, Jesus. I mean, he's just the absolute worst. I'm very glad actually that he's out of the hospital, not for any concern for his well-being, but just my soul feels better for perhaps like having to wrestle the darkest impulses of myself. Of like, it was so hard. It was just like I had to beat up the devil.
They would have claimed that, like, he got murdered by Hillary Clinton or something. It would have been like Clinton body count.
Yes.
Which they love.
She was able. She was able to
she's why Scalia died somehow too.
Yeah. Oh no, they also think that Scalia was murdered. I actually like, Ginni Thomas explaining how Biden and his buddies, Biden and his family, were all going to be sentenced by military tribunals. They love these military tribunals, according to like QAnon people. Actually, Lynch was just sentenced, and Sotomayor is going to be executed tomorrow, according to, because she was found guilty by a military tribunal. I don't understand. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because like these same senators repeating QAnon talking points are also the ones preaching about the fact that as a public defender, Judge Jackson did her job and represented people at Guantanamo.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh yeah, no, they hate that.
Military tribunals are great when you're trying to just murder random American citizens, I guess.
But no. They don't want. Their whole thing is that they actually don't want those people to have a defense. Mm-hmm. That's why I think that is why they like the military tribunals, because they think that like the person just doesn't have a defense, and people can do whatever they want. Like that's sort of the perception, and they can be tortured.
Well, they love Russia. I mean, people talk about conservatives. What does Putin have on conservatives? It's like, no, it's more that they are fellow travelers. That's the problem, and
they agree with each other.
Yeah. I mean, even the idea that Graham was brought off, and so many liberals kept pushing that idea, like somehow he was noble. He was never noble. He's an opportunist. And so he went where the money was. And it's like, but he said that if he elected Trump, we would get beaten. Well, yes, he believed that would happen, because it was quite a weird thing that Donald Trump was president.
Yeah.
It happened. Like he probably thought, gee,
he did used to be less of an overt psychopath, but like he was never a good person. Like
no, he's just like letting his freak flag fly now because he can.
Yeah, it's like people talk about Elise Stefanik on that way, and it's like, oh, she said all this stuff against Trump, and now she's a Trump supporter. Well, because I think she never had beliefs. She was someone, say with Nancy Mace, it was kind of like if you were the good Republican school of all pre-Trump, pre-MAGA, it was like, okay, well, if you want to make these achievements, this is what you say, this is what you talk about. Of course, you vote against gay rights, but you don't call people, gay epithets, and you're not cruel to transgender people. This is respectable. How we respectably engage. It's country club republicanism, and then suddenly that wasn't in vote. That's not what voters want, and so but it's not like they had a core belief. It was just that, to be a successful Republican means being terrible. I'll be terrible, and it's easy.
Well, also, I mean, I think it was kind of like we're now free to say all of these things that we felt like we couldn't say before. For propriety, for reasons of propriety, and now that there's no, like, the floodgates are open, they can say whatever the hell they damn want.
Yep.
Like,
the cruelty is the point.
Yeah.
Very true. I mean, in other parts of the country, what we're making it child abuse to not torture your transgender child in Texas. I mean, like, truly just trying to do the worst things humanly possible.
Yeah, I mean, they're fundamentally bad people, and we try to find a way that we don't believe this is the case. Back to the Supreme Court, though, I want to tell you, both of you on this, we talked a little bit about this prior to the live, and I think Robyn and I have different views on this. So every time there's a horrible thing related to the Supreme Court, a lot of people have this idea that Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have resigned and been replaced with a younger Ruth Bader Ginsburg, sort of like Doctor Who or something. And my sense of that was, just on some backstory. Obama appointed, 2 justices in his first term. There were many moderates who were very big on the appearance of court packing. So it's like you only get 1 per year. And then his first 2 were pre-Tea Party revolution, sort of the peak of his power. After the Tea Party, I mean, you get people like Rubio. Republicans didn't F around and send people like Sinema, who wanted to like play kissy face with Democrats and be nice to them. They sent partisan hacks. Then Cruz in 2012, and then Tom Cotton in 2014, who blocked Obama appointee who was dying just to be petty to Obama. And so the Senate shift, even though we didn't lose the Senate until 2014, the ability to compromise, to ever kind of give any wins to Obama and the Democrats, had fundamentally changed. And so, yes, maybe when we still had, and there was still a filibuster, so it was a given that Cruz would have initiated a filibuster after 2012 for any replacement of Ginsburg. But to get 60 votes, I mean, maybe there would have been Garland probably would have been your best bet, like a 60-year-old moderate as opposed to a liberal. And I mean, there are certain marquee cases where, sure, that's great, but there were also, could you speak to that about, I think we look at abortion, gay rights, same-sex marriage, rightly so, but there were also areas where a Garland versus a Ginsburg, there would have been a lot of cases that would have made a big deal if we lost Ginsburg sooner. Do you agree with that? And if so, could you?
So, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think, I think we had about 2 years to get decent justices on the court. That's how we got Kagan and Sotomayor. I particularly am a fan of Sotomayor. And I mean, after that, it wasn't even just the Republicans who had further radicalized because, oh my God, we have a Black president. But Democrats fucking blew a lot of shit during the Obama presidency too. Yeah. Particularly with regard to judges. We let Patrick Leahy stay in charge of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where he invented a new, stricter rule about blue slips and allowed Republicans to keep Obama appointees off the bench when Democrats held the Senate.
Yeah, like, can you explain blue slips for anyone who's not aware? Yeah, I want you to do that because it's fucking insane.
It's insane. So the blue slip is actually, it's the color of the paper that a home state senator can use to show well, any senator can use it to show whether or not they support a judicial candidate. And historically, yes, like senators from a given state are given some sort of additional reverence, or at least like discussion with, when it's a judicial appointment for their state. And so like what different Senate judiciary chairs use them to different extents. But what Patrick Leahy did was he made it so that any Republican could oppose a judge in their state, and he would just let that indefinitely keep the judicial nomination on hold, and they would never even try to move it out of committee.
Yeah. And I remember when the Senate flipped, and then we had with Trump, and Leahy tried it again, and McConnell just laughed in his face. And it always reminds me when McConnell's dealing with Democrats on deals like this and Senate norms and all. It reminds me of like 8 years ago, like this very unbalanced man jumped into a lion's enclosure at a zoo, and the lion kind of comes up, and at first is very skeptical, like, is this a are they gonna like tase my ass or something? He like kind of pets the guy on the head. He's like, what? Is this real? I have too much to drink. Is this really? And then he just ate the guy. He's like, well, you only live once. But it's just absurd. But that's another example. And then all guys like Leahy and others who just go, they're all country club. There's no difference to me from country club Democrats and country club Republicans. Leahy, Feinstein, they're all part of that. And they're all the folks who just, they shower together, they're at the club, and they just like, they're all stunned, like, oh my goodness, the rules. Oh my, and he whined. And like McConnell just laughed, like literally his like feet up, dangling laughter at how ridiculous, like, well, okay, you guys are suckers, but we're not.
Yeah.
And so, but go back to so that was one area of dropping the ball, which Democrats don't talk about. Republicans would never stop talking about it. So like you could go into, if I go into a black barbershop and like, hey, those blue slips are fucked up, right? They'd be like, what are you talking about? Whereas you could go into like, some southern garage white guy, whatever, and he'd be like, yeah, that damn Bork, they kept him off the court. They said this stuff about Kavanaugh. It's like, why do you know? Like, but this cult has been like put into their heads, creating the grievance culture. We just kind of like keep getting our asses kicked, and at least
I think there are a lot of reasons why that's like more difficult for us. I, for one, can't really like stand watching like, I couldn't watch this, what we're doing right now. Like I don't watch like a lot of like there would a Democratic Tucker Carlson, we would get bored. We would get very, very bored. Like I think that would be a very difficult sort of thing to do. It's why we also always had trouble with radio shows and everything. We like our podcasts, but they have to actually be interesting. We don't just want to listen to someone yell a lot and be, fake outraged and do like weird like puppy dog faces. Like oh my God, I actually can't do a Tucker Carlson sad Labrador face. It doesn't work on me. It's like how I can't wink.
We just need to hire someone or do something. I mean, part of it is like we spend so much time trying to deprogram people who are never going to switch, and it's just like, why don't you go to again, the black barbershops, the beauty salons, the young, instead of yelling, because what I see on my on Twitter often are just people yelling at young people and saying they're idiots for not for being dispirited. Like, go to people who might be inclined to at some point in their lives vote for Democrats and encourage them and get them motivated and get them excited about stuff. And that's the problem, is that it is easier to be angry than to get excited, because you get excited and it breaks. And something gentleman Marcus and I were talking about this on Twitter the other day, and it was kind of like, well, you know, you have to promise these things even though you don't really do them, and that's what voters want to hear. And it's like, well, because to me, it's like, you know, no one in 2020, none of the Democrats ran on essentially just holding the wolves at the door, because that was not compelling. In fact, what they tried to run on and how they, you know, people, the moderates, so like Klobuchar, Buttigieg, specifically Biden, tried to distinguish themselves from Sanders and Castro and Warren, was that we can work with Republicans, we can get things done. And it wasn't just like appoint judges. So I'm not dismissing that.
It's real cute.
But when partisans talk about, well, we got all these justices, and Sinema and Manchin have voted for all our judges, even though they're tanked all our agenda and climate. It's like, well, why did you have a climate platform? Like, why did you have an intern bother with a climate section of your webpage? Buttigieg, Klobuchar, Biden, why didn't you just have like just have that be your whole page, income inequality, like that, just let that be it. But the idea is that because no one is going to stand in line for people are, the left of center voters tend to be, we want to see something happen. And everyone's like, okay, well, what about naming and it's always this little small incremental stuff, which is not terrible, but it gets buried if at the same time Republicans are crushing you at the state level in just hardcore, like we elected a Democratic Senate in general to stop a lot of this stuff. Like, if you cannot respond with, federal support for abortion rights and for voting rights in response to this, then kind of,
it feels like, what's the point? And so many Democrats still want to believe that like Aaron Sorkin writes reality, which he doesn't. And like and so for some reason, like many of the people in the most powerful positions, like still want to go back to a time when it's like, oh no, the House was the enemy of the Senate, not the other party. Well, guess what? That's not fucking reality. Yeah. And we live in a world where the other side, most of them, are acting in bad faith. And that is just true. And we can't pretend like as someone who's going to break out an anti-racist baby book because there's, a Black woman who might get confirmed to the Supreme Court is acting in good faith. He's clearly not. And also, one other thing is like policy-wise, one argument I always hear against, things that young people actually want is like, oh, well, we have to think about, those rural white voters, who are never going to vote for us again anyway. Rather than actually trying to get the votes of young people who statistically don't vote, but maybe could if they actually had something to fucking believe in.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I feel like there is this like sort of terror. They don't actually want to have to appeal to young people and want to be able to say, oh, young people don't vote, whatever, because let's be real, the young people are idealistic, and idealistic is tricky. They don't want idealistic. They want, and they don't want people who are going to hypothetically, in their minds, embarrass them. And, Democrats have like a long history of trying to be like, no, we're not hippies. We're not hippies. We swear. And we're not scary. We're super normal. We're going a different way after Jesse Jackson. Like it's, they're very like, let's not scare people. And I think there is absolutely a terror over, young people being, like, oh, the young people are going to scare the people that we really do want, these suburban voters. And I don't think they want rural voters. I don't think they give a shit about rural voters. I think they want like Republican soccer moms with blonde ponytails. Like that is the beautiful, beautiful dream. They're on the PTA. They drive minivans. I don't know if people still have minivans. I don't. Yeah. But,
yeah.
That whole deal. And they want that. They don't want like weird young people being weird and potentially like not as controllable.
Yeah, my a friend of mine on Twitter, Oliver Willis, was like he essentially tweeted something about this concern or whatever, and some partisans have responded of like essentially stereotyping him as a Bernie bro. He was not. He's a Hillary Clinton supporter, and as one of those white liberals trying to stir crap up, and he's black. But it was essentially falling into and I've gotten this as well. Like they will fall in the idea of like, oh, you must be this if you dare, because good black people, good Democrats, and they're all moderates, and there are no. But again, Maxine Waters, who now is on the people was quite liberal, and same with Jesse Jackson. So black people are liberal. I mean, obviously, if you're getting 90% of any group, you're going to have some for whatever. But if you can't defend the first black woman nominated to the Supreme Court against racist attacks, then people who are otherwise, there are Tim Scotts with integrity, right? So there are people who have his sort of views on, say, economic policy and other things or whatever, but they vote for Democrats, both for historical reasons. Their families, they grew up in Democratic families. Also, they believe that Democrats are not racist and Republicans are racist. They remember welfare mothers and all that. And if instead of that, your response is to talk about being a bipartisanship and Reagan, the great communicator, then they're going to be like, well, why should I bother? Why don't I just vote for Republicans? Because so
they're so fabulous.
So I mean, I do think that if you want 90% of a group, you need to kind of go all out for them. And I didn't see that. And I said, very important people will lecture us about how that was the right thing to do. And otherwise you would have alienated Manchin, and she had to go sit there and take her punches. But it's a grotesque.
And she voted for Kavanaugh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You couldn't, who again lost his temper. And so the idea that she lost her temper would have lost Manchin would again go back to, should have hit him on, again, it's job discrimination. And women have seen this, women of color have seen this. It's like, oh, well, in that client meeting, you kind of raised your voice at the client, you're a little disrespectful. And then her white colleague had, been very disrespectful, had very much raised their voice, but no one hears that. And they've done studies of this also.
Absolutely.
And no one should have to be harassed as part of a job interview. Like,
and there's no range, as you had said. Ask a relevant question is, you are a member of an extreme. So a relevant, if she's a member of the Nation of Islam, or even, that, or husbands, that is almost relevant, maybe. Like you could talk about it, but just on the very influence of your religion, I'm just bringing up because I'm pissed. And it just pisses me off because, again, that's between you and Diane.
Sorry, excuse me. I have really bad allergies today.
Spring. I mean, Dianne Feinstein is not all there, and I'm not trying to.
Not so much, no.
No, like someone close to her needs to tell her to
stop.
Well,
apparently, what I've learned is the definition of ageism is to acknowledge that one's protected group, politicians, are mortals. So any other 87-year-old person, they'd be like, I'm thinking of renewing my driver's license. You're like, I don't know. If you're an 88-year-old senator, I'm going to run for Senate again. You're like, of course, because you can do this. It's like, I'm an 80-year-old president. I'm going to be traveling to Poland and changing multiple time zones and giving speeches and be really stressed. And I'm sure
I would be tired.
Every doctor in the world would say, yes, I'm going to sign you up for that. And you should do that for another 7 years. And if you ever dare say that, it's somehow crazy talk.
Although, you know what? I feel like Liz Warren still has several more years in her.
Yeah, no, she for sure does. She's like,
women do live longer than men. But also, and this is quite, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you guys. That I like to think that is not as big a deal as it is now, as it is the difference between 80 and 72.
Right.
And so I think there's a tremendous difference between when it was Warren and Sanders. It's like there's just a lot happens in that time, unfortunately. But there's a sort of gerontocracy.
Warren has that like New England, like she's from Oklahoma, but she is at New England school marm energy. And as someone who went to elementary school in Massachusetts, those bitches go hard for a long time. Like they're like 90 years old and they're like, still pushing it.
Well, the Democratic Party
still setting your attention.
During a pandemic, so everyone's scared. Like there was a meeting where Jen Psaki has COVID and in a room. Well, she was in a room with like everyone there was over 80 because with Pelosi and Biden, and it's I do think it's relevant to the extent I don't believe that every person, because as you've mentioned, Robyn, like there are older Democrats, Parker Lee and others who are awesome, and Maxine Waters, they're awesome, but you do run. Statistically, I think it does speak to what you're describing with Leahy, Jamie, and other of just this obsession with a world does not exist anymore. And that's true often in many fields. It can be a problem, and I'm not trying to be overtly ageist, but I think if you are
also Dianne Feinstein hasn't ever really been that good. Like,
yeah, there's that.
But I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, if she were like still like Maxine Watersing out there, I'd be like, yes, continue on, Dianne Feinstein. But like, she has been pretty much terrible since I've been aware of Dianne as a person. Like,
and she's not in a state where it's like, oh my God, a Republican's gonna win if she retires. Like,
exactly.
We will probably get another liberal, but she is.
We would get someone
build up that backbench.
She's very much an institutionalist, and that is one of the problems with the Democratic Party. And they have that connection that the West Wingism and whatever. Even Jen Psaki saying the West Wing has influenced me. It's not something that, and Psaki's around my age. That was what we were on in our 20s, and my wife and I watched the show, and there's a part of us who wanted
such a weird 20s.
We wanted to.
I was in college and fell in love with it. Actually,
you might want politics to be that way.
Yeah, no.
I sort of was someone who didn't like the incredible whiteness of the West Wing comparatively.
Yeah.
Also, Aaron Sorkin is really bad at writing women.
I was just gonna say, if this were an Aaron Sorkin show, Jamie and I would not get as many lines as we're getting right now.
Well, no, I would just yell at you when you would tell me I'm brilliant.
Like CJ and Donna got so much better after Aaron Sorkin left. Okay, I said it. All right, continue.
I've still never seen The West Wing.
I would certainly agree with. I don't think but I think someone of AOC's age and just others just fundamentally don't view, like, Republicans are Ted Cruz, Republicans are Newt Gingrich. Like, you don't have a memory of them ever being slightly better or decent. Even as I here I'm going to do something. I will defend Ben Sasse only in this aspect. People said, well, it's no different. He was no different from Graham and Cruz because he still voted against her. And I'm like, look, even if we were saying that every Republican on that Judiciary Committee was going to vote against her just because she's liberal, just being polite, and I'm not always about polite, but I don't, not slapping her around, Blackburn, others were just, that to me, you set a standard of what a Black woman should have to accept is unacceptable to me. I think same way as women, same way, you don't want necessarily to have to get the job. It's fine. And in a way, he was actually open. He was like, Cruz and the others are both rude, but also being part of the discrimination of saying, oh, well, I'm not going to, your background in history, even though I voted for others. Sasse at least saying, you're a liberal, I only vote for, yes, Barrett's a hack, but her philosophy is in line with mine, which leads me to a question for you. Is it just basically a question of how radicalized the Senate became, where someone like Ginsburg and Scalia got a lot of Democratic votes, but Democrats have always been weird. And obviously Thomas confirmed of a Democratic Senate because God knows what happened there. But, Ginsburg got only, I think it was like 97 votes. He was overwhelmingly, because essentially qualified men qualified like Jackson. And now it's about really pretty much, are you liberal or conservative? And so that's
Oh yeah, and like we may, I mean, and like we may jurisprudentially end up with another RBG. Judge Jackson may end up her. Justice Sotomayor has been great, but we would never ever be able to get someone with RBG's background on the court today, founding the ACLU Women's Rights Project.
Yeah.
Even with
you're biased towards women.
Even with the 50-50 Democrats right now, like you would not get RBG through today.
She would never have been nominated.
No.
And also it just seems, and to what Sassy said, it's like, okay, well, that would be my question to him. Because again, there were Republicans who were just as conservative as you back then, but they voted for, and I'm sure in full awareness of Ginsburg's views, they voted for her on essentially the principle. There's pretty high bar of president gets his picks unless you're completely unqualified, which Republicans blew up where they started hiring, nominating fetuses from the Federalist Society, stand for life, who are just complete reliable hacks and partisans. And
well, I think, the right started playing hardball and started being like, we don't care about these, rules and precedents and niceties. And Democrats were like, let's just keep going with that. That's what's great. Why change it?
Yeah.
That would have been fine if, the other side was playing the same game.
No. So what this means is essentially you have to have, so a president's going to have control of the Senate. His party will have to have control of the Senate as well to ever confirm a Supreme Court justice, which just makes it even more obvious it's just a political body, despite Feinstein's wistful speech, which I kind of made fun of last week about this is not a partisan body, which not even you believe that, Diane, when you voted, your stated reasons against Alito, who was perfectly qualified in many ways, was that he was fiercely anti-abortion. And so I don't know. So
I think the Republicans have sort of decided to do this thing where they're like, oh, we're just voting. It's not that we're being partisan. It's that we're voting for originalists only. And we only want people who will interpret things exactly the way they were written at the time.
Oh, yeah.
I really wish that they would just admit that when they say originalism, they mean they only want rights for rich white men.
Oh, yeah.
Just fucking own it.
Yeah.
Well, no one says Clarence Thomas.
At the same time, they have no problem throwing that on the table for the most part these days. And declaring rich white men to be the most oppressed of all people.
Yeah. Well, Clarence Thomas always says, liberals are being unfair to him as a black man for these views. I'm always like, just show me where in your originalist ideology, Brown versus Board of Education, Loving West Virginia, how would you have ruled and how would you have applied your originalist philosophy to them? Because Brown versus Board of Education was clearly what would be defined as judicial activism. There was clear. I think
some of them are saying now that they don't like Brown versus the Board of Education quite openly.
And up this week.
Thomas needs to own that and beyond. You would not have gone to Harvard. I'm tired of him, and even Barrett to a degree, but she's a white woman. In certain ways of okay, your position to a certain degree comes from liberals fighting these battles for you. Instead of saying thanks, you pretend that our jurisprudence is completely irrational. It's fascinating. I think you and I, Jamie, I talked about this because I was the Portland Playhouse in Portland here, I'm on the board of, and they had done a production of Thurgood, which is amazing. It's a one-man show. And just part of his career and how he was doing it was always fascinating because my wife and I were watching it and looking at each other because it was the cases of where, before a trumped up Supreme Court, a lot of this stuff would just be get out, but a lot of he was arguing legal principles against discrimination. And something that stood out to me was when in South Carolina, the governor at the time had said, all right, fine, I will spend millions to bring the schools, black schools, to the same status as white schools. You will not be able to prove that they are less than equal. But I don't, I will still want them segregated. So the marshal's tack then was to go to inherently separating people, even if you're, the black movie theaters, and the black schools are just as good, even if better. Inherently, by separating them, you are inherently saying that they are lesser than you. It's humiliation. It's bad. And his rule on that, on humiliation, it just stuck with me. And I remember Thomas's dissent in Oberfeld was that the government can't make you feel lesser. That's just on you. So if gay people feel like this discriminating that's against them, it just stood out to me. It's like, you SOB. And I don't even know if that was an intentional reference, but it was clearly like that's.
And frankly, like, despite the fact that he's married to a white woman, I'm not convinced he wouldn't vote to overturn Loving. Also, like,
I think he probably would, quite frankly.
And Mitch McConnell, whose wife isn't white, doesn't say fucking anything publicly about that.
Well, I mean, what they will say.
They're going pretty far back. They're going after Griswold and shit. So like,
but that's not abortion.
They will generally say that. Well, the states. I mean, this was what Roberts had said, which was, of course, proven to be all crap. Was that we don't need the VR rights because America has changed. I had nothing to do with that change. I worked for Reagan, but I hear my driver tells me that things are much better for us Negroes. So stuff has changed. So he and so that's what they would claim. Like, you don't need all of this. Like, of course, who would discriminate? Who would deliberately separate Black people and white people in the schools, even though that has been steadily happening, and that's why homeschooling push everything. But it's so fascinating to me because it all comes back to them wanting to outlaw critical race theory, because the idea of trying to look at everything as being about race is racism, even though to fundamentally understand America, you have to understand race. I mean, that is the core of everything. I mean, that was why I agreed the founding is 1619, because the whole question is about race. We didn't fight a civil war because certain Americans still wanted to only have to have tea times and speak with English accents. It was not still over some sort of British disagreement. It was fundamentally over race. Everything has been. So it's astonishing. So yes, they will throw this.
They want everyone to pretend that it's not, so they can continue on being super racist while everyone is just like, no, they're just being normal. Like, that's what normal is. It has nothing to do with race. That is just what normal is. And that's what they want. It's this overwhelming fear that, their shit isn't being normalized anymore.
Well, and much like the Fugitive Slave Act, which was, again, I learned this later. You're never taught this, because they cleverly talk about the war of Northern aggression when it was really the South wanted slavery everywhere, for there'd be no safe place for even freed Black people, because every incentive was to say, yeah, that guy's a former escaped slave, take him. And they were doing that in, like, the lady in Missouri was kind of like wanted to sue. If you remember this case, so they wanted to the law she wanted to make where some random person could sue a woman for crossing state lines to have an abortion.
Yeah,
usually don't want abortion legalized anywhere, which makes sense, because if you do the full faith and credit clause, then everyone's going to be traveling to Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great industry, right? But they don't want that. They don't want anyone doing it. They don't want to recognize marriage equality or abortion.
Well, and so I've seen some, like, some of the very smart legal minds on Twitter, and I mean, like, your blue check MSNBC contributor people who are like, oh yeah, the law like the one that was proposed in Missouri that we would, make it a crime to cross state lines for an abortion. The Supreme Court would never uphold that. And I'm like, okay, except the only thing that this court maybe likes as much as taking rights away from women and people of color, it's decimating the Commerce Clause, because that's how we pass federal civil rights laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would love to decimate the Commerce Clause. Like, that would be an added bonus to fucking over pregnant people.
Yeah, it was like this idea that, and I've seen a lot of Democrats do that. So when they complained that not enough young people or Southern voters voted in 2016, understanding that abortion was on the but it's like, well, you always took for, how do you say that when at the same time you talk about the Supreme Court not being partisan, you talk about constitutional right to abortion and not talk about it as something that you have to fight and scramble for in the mud every day to maintain it. I feel like a lot of Democrats have embraced a sort of institutionalism that, well, of course, the Supreme Court won't, these things can't change. So then if that's the case, then it's like, well, why am I standing in line for 12 hours? Why am I voting for a candidate I'm maybe not crazy about to preserve abortion? Like, because no one's going to take that away, right? And I mean, and I think Hillary did make that point, but it wasn't, I mean, all the blue checks, all the Democrats, it wasn't just Stein. It was,
hey, I have a blue check. You guys could go get blue checks, by the way. You're both qualified.
Yes, the MSNBC contributors perhaps were saying that this was somehow all, you know, they were never presenting this as a serious, legit situation.
Yeah.
And even now it's hard.
There was that issue where they're like, okay, we don't want to offend the people who who hate abortion. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to walk that line where they were like, okay, well, you need to vote for us so you can have abortion, but also we can't talk about abortion because that's going to upset some people.
Yeah. Well, that was a big part of the campaign, right? Of trying to get, I mean, that's why you had Tim Kaine, and that's why you were trying to win over people, presumably those the soccer moms you're talking about who hated Trump, but, you know, didn't support abortion rights. And every one of those women held their nose and voted for Trump so they could get everyone on the Supreme Court right now. And
no one fucking held their nose and voted for Trump. Oh, I never want to hear that phrase again. That didn't happen.
Yeah, well, that is their suggestion. Yes, I don't believe it happened. That is what they all say, that we did this because we had no choice, because, you know, he was such a faithful supporter of abortion rights for the last 12 days, anti-abortion rights for the last 12 days. And then suddenly, I mean, he understood that was how the Schlafly, the wing that took over the Republican Party, like that had all the power, and he was suddenly talking the rhetoric. And I knew we were in trouble when Schlafly endorsed him, even though I was amused that Cruz got snubbed. And I felt like he was probably sad that day. So I was very happy. But at the same time, I was like, oh yeah, this is not good. Like he's going to be seen as a true believer. She's giving him the
although really, like, if you look at the polling on abortion and specifically on Roe, it's 7 and 10 for Roe. It's around 70%. But what it is, it's not about the fact that, like, it's you know, it's about getting the really, really loud, crazy Republicans to all show up on election day.
Yeah. That their views are majoritarian. Mm-hmm. And when they are in fact not, because, you know, they'll be out there saying, well, you know, everyone else people are getting kicked off of Twitter because they agree with the majority of people about, you know, trans rights, COVID shit, everything. And so they'll just keep saying over and over again, oh, the majority of people don't want abortion. People hate abortion, blah, blah, blah. And there's an impetus, I think, from some Democrats to just like admit that that is true, like sort of like yes and that, when it is not in fact true. And in fact, Democratic and even socialist-y policies are a lot more popular in actuality than our Republican social and economic policies.
Not to mention, they would all love, you know, welfare and TANF and everything if it were only for white people. So
you can't really talk about the racial aspects of that and how it was demonized. But yeah, I mean, I think Reagan did a good job of shifting, you know, this hard right economic agenda by linking it to like welfare queens or whatever. It's not, you know, obviously it was racist, but it's to make welfare be viewed as a racial.
Well, I think that was very much done on purpose because they wanted to get rid of welfare and get rid of social programs in general. Like that they always wanted that.
One of those folks.
One of the ways that made it very easy to do that was like, oh, it's for Black people. Black people who are scary and are going to buy Cadillacs with your hard-earned dollars.
In my world, I never knew growing up any Black people on welfare, just in my world, right? And everyone, and I worked at a grocery store, so I would see, I mean, the WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, food stamps or whatever. There were always white people in my area, and often white parents of white classmates of mine or whatever. So that's how I kind of viewed it. But even then, those folks are probably still in their own minds.
Oh yeah.
Well, no, I have relatives who have relied on government assistance who will bitch about welfare queens and whatnot. And they truly don't see the difference because they truly don't see how racist they are, even when I tell them to their face. I wonder why some of my extended family doesn't like me.
Well, you were honest about it. So yes, I am happy that we are getting our Jackson on the court. It'll be great.
It's gonna be a wonderful. Like, I no longer have the ability to have the sense of hope and optimism.
I know, me neither.
It's just physically gone.
Well, because this is the thing. The sad thing is, we know, even though she's on there, it's not going to make a damn difference at all because we're still losing everything.
But it's still it is gonna be incredible to see her on the court. It really is.
We can take that victory, and then I think for the courts, I mean, what are some options? I know the ridiculous stuff in Wisconsin, you'd written about that Supreme Court action, but what are some actual, if voters feel frustrated and the Supreme Court is this unchecked force is going to knock everything down, to the point where I've seen it even in Wonkette comments where people have been like, well, there's no point even passing this so progressive law because Supreme Court will knock it down, which to a degree might be true. But what is the solution beyond complaining about 2016? Because that's usually where it goes down to.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, what we need to do is get actual good candidates in there and vote for them, because I am really, really, really terrified of midterms and what's about to happen in November at the national level and also here at the state level in Wisconsin, because all of our state level officials, as well as that shithead Ron Johnson, are up for re-election. And I'm really afraid because I think that the disgusting racist bullshit that Republicans have been pulling has been working. And I think that what we need
really has, and it's scary how well it's been working.
Yeah.
It's a consistent message, and I think you can counter that message, but I feel like because Democrats don't really want to, and they are perhaps hedging that, it becomes it's only one group speaking. Like, no one is able to say this is a party, this is a domestic terror threat. You would think after, folding in front of after the insurrection and still taking, still supporting and being visibly seen with someone who incited an insurrection against the United States. We've gotten kind of nowhere with it. And I mean, I think it's about being inclined to just get hard on them and so forth and go against and accept this is what the reality is. Is there a chance of getting rid of Johnson? People seem to think that because his favorabilities are low, and
his favorability is low. So is our Democratic governors. I don't know. We'll see. I think our great lieutenant governor is going to win the nomination against Ron Johnson. I think he's a great candidate. He's the first Black man to be lieutenant governor in Wisconsin. I don't know. Well, I'm worried the racist bullshit is going to work, particularly with, Wisconsin is really, really good at disenfranchising our Black voters in a number of ways. We still have that horrific voter ID law on the books. We incarcerate a higher percentage of our Black people than any other state. 1 in every 36 Black men in Wisconsin is in prison. And then even after people get out, if they're still on supervision, parole, or probation for a felony, they still can't exercise their voting rights. So disenfranchisement is a huge issue here. That said, I mean, it's possible. We won, Biden won Wisconsin in 2020. If our state assembly, if we didn't have the most gerrymandered maps in the country, our state assembly would be much better than it is. In 2018, Democrats won well over 50% of the vote. It was not reflected in the state assembly because of our gerrymandering. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I'm always worried that the angry racists are angrier and therefore more ready to get out to the polls. And it's going to be a get out the vote race.
Yeah, get out the vote. Well, leave it. Often with these conversations, we seem like I look down and it's 45 minutes in, and next thing I look up, it's 90 minutes in. But thank you again. It's been a great chat.
Yes, we love having you.
It's always good. I always enjoy this.
Thank you. What do you have going on for tomorrow, Robyn?
I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know. I've been kind of mental. I went on like the most freaking insane rabbit hole yesterday involving satanic ritual abuse and military tribunals. And so we may have something involving that.
Awesome. I will probably see where we are with Ukraine and if Biden got us into a World War III. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. If all of these, like the most YouTube chat supposed to say, like, share, subscribe. Thank you for participating. And if you enjoy these, also send a few, what do they call them in Wonkette, Ameros our way in support of it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.